Next on Made in Virginia, we visit Harrisonburg and take a step back in time to see jewelry manufacturing done the way it was in the late 19th and early 20th century with Hugo Cole. Then we head south to Waynesboro, Virginia to learn all about glass blowing with Romeo Glass. That's all next on Made in Virginia. Production funding for Made in Virginia is made possible in part by the Virginia Foundation for Public Media, supporting public media initiatives throughout Virginia, and by at Atlantic Union Bank, we believe that Made in Virginia means something special, something unique. After all, Virginia is where tradition meets technology, where hard work combines with innovation, where artisans, entrepreneurs, small businesses, and corporations take business to the next level. We're there every step of the way as champions of Virginia businesses and as a proud supporter of Made in Virginia and Virginia Public Broadcasting. Walking into Hugo Kohl's jewelry manufacturing studio and boutique store is like stepping back in time. Located in the second industrial ice factory in America, Hugo Kohl has opened the space for public to come watch him work and to see history in motion. They craft die-struck jewelry for the historical and vintage markets.
One of the things I've always loved from childhood till today is seeing other people's workspaces. And that's why I opened this space up and made it as visible as it can possibly practically be. A lot of times people will walk in with their diamond and they will stand in that glass and watch someone set it in their gold or platinum ring and walk out the door, and they really enjoy that. And I enjoy sharing it. The Ice House is really cool, and it's cool from a number of points of view, and one is its visual aspect. The other one is its history. So this is the second ice factory in the United States, which also means the second ice factory in the world. Industrial ice is an American invention. It is no coincidence that the Ice House and the poultry industry are located right next to each other. It's also no coincidence where it sits on the map. It is halfway in between upstate New York and Florida. In this ice factory is where they first started chipping ice and putting it in bags and distributing it to homes, and is where the first icebox started to happen. Everybody, when they think about the icebox, they think of New York City with a guy with a block of ice, but it didn't happen there first, it happened here first.
Hugo Cole has saved, restored, and uses old technology with a modern spin to manufacture their jewelry. A lot of the machinery used in the process is from the first industrial age, including a drop hammer from 1840 and a screw press from 1880.
One of the interesting things about some of our products is as many as we can, and I'd like it to eventually be all of them, would be die-struck. And one of the interesting things about older jewelry from this first industrial age is that it was all die-struck. And so people always ask me this question when they walk into the boutique: how come I got my grandmother's ring that is from the mid-1920s and it still looks like it's brand new, but I bought this other piece of jewelry and it's 5 years old and it's basically worn out? Well, the difference is the technology. And the technology that replaced die striking is lost wax casting. There's nothing wrong with it, but it renders the finished piece with different qualities. And one of the qualities of striking jewelry is it work hardens the metal and it makes it as tough and durable as it can possibly be at room temperature. So when you have a die-struck piece of jewelry, one of the advantages of it is you're going to be able to wear it. Let's say you're 25 years old and you just bought a bracelet from me that's been die rolled. Your grandchild's going to own that bracelet. And so that's one of the great advantages of it. The other advantage of it is the level of detail that you can impose on the metal really goes way, way up. So when you strike something, you can put a higher resolution and a greater amount of information in a smaller space.
Hugo starts the process with a hub, which is a one-of-a-kind piece of 3D art made out of hardened tool steel.
So when I talk about we start with the original artwork, it does not mean a sketch or a plate in a book. It means a 3D piece that has been carved out of steel. And when I say steel, I actually mean tool steel. So the room that we keep the hubs in is called a hub vault. This is not some name that I contrived. If this were 1820 and we're a jewelry factory, we'd have a hub vault. That's where we store our hubs, and it's where we keep them safe. The really expensive part of this process was getting the steel to make a hub and having a hub cutter, training a hub cutter to do this kind of work. Everything else from then on is a little bit less expensive. The only thing we do with the hub is make tools that we're going to manufacture with. Once we make a tool, the hub goes back in the vault to be kept safe. When we use these tools to manufacture a piece, there's a lot of slamming and banging and pressing up and down, and tools invariably will break. That's why we cannot break the hub. The hub is used to sink a die, then it goes back into the hub vault. The die is hardened and then used to sink a forcer. Once the forcer is hardened, now we can use one or the other to make a trim tool, to make piercing tools, to make more tools from that, so we can go back out into the workshop and be a factory and do art by means of mechanical reproduction.
First, a bracelet pattern is selected and mounted to the rolling mill. The metal is measured and put through the slitter.
When we make a bracelet, the bracelets are cataloged and somebody will order a design. And so we will pull the tools. The tools are the actual roll itself and a piece called a follower that goes with it. And we'll mount them up in the mill. Once we mount them up in a mill, we'll take a sheet of metal and we'll slit it. That means we'll cut a ribbon out of it that's the right width and the right length, and then we'll roll it underneath the roll.
Then the thin piece of metal is fed into the rolling mill to shape the bracelet. The metal is trimmed and the ends are heated. And the ends are dipped in acid. A knuckler rolls the end of the bracelet. Next, the hallmark is stamped into the bracelet, including the name, type of metal, and location. It is then put in the bracelet bender. A stone is set with a screw press. The bracelet is put into an ultrasonic machine. Finally, the bracelet is steamed and polished. Up next, a die-struck ring. The process begins with selecting a gold rod. A percussion press is used to flatten and stamp the rod on a die. Then a shockwave is created to remove the shank out of the die. Next, the head of the ring is stamped. The ring head is trimmed. Then the shank is bent into a circle to form a ring. The head is soldered onto the ring. It is put into the ultrasonic machine and then to the steamer a few times. The stone is selected and set into the head of the ring. Next, the hallmark is put on the ring. Finally, the ring is polished. Next, we see how a pendant is made. A sheet of metal and a pattern are selected. The front side metal is put into the drop hammer and the hammer drops. The front side of the pin is heated with a torch. From there, it goes to the ultrasonic machine, and then it is steamed. The backside metal is put into the drop hammer. A screw press is used to trim the excess metal off the pin. The back is soldered onto the front of the pendant. A clip pin is soldered onto the back. It is put in the ultrasonic, steamed, and finally, the pendant is polished. Hugo Cole will never stop searching for hubs at the edge of being lost forever as he continues to refine his manufacturing process and expand his jewelry catalog.
I get a certain special kind of hate mail that I don't like getting, but I actually love getting simultaneously. And it says, Hugo, you are ruining the marketplace for vintage and antique jewelry because nobody can tell your stuff from the old stuff, which means you're angry at me because I'm messing with your business model, but I'm doing my thing the way it is actually supposed to be done. So I don't like getting it, and I love getting it. And so that's kind of what's special about having a hub vault. Nobody else has a hub vault. That's what's special about having this workshop because nobody else has got this workshop. That's what's special about having these skills and these workstations and these machines is if we go back, 1820, 1850, 1880, this was ubiquitous. Today, this is it. And so this is why it works as an economic model. It's not necessarily because I'm some kind of great, intuitive, brilliant businessman. I'm not. I'm reasonably good at making things. The artwork and the machinery that we work with is what's brilliant.
Now, let's head south down Interstate 81 and heat things up with some glass blowing. Located in Waynesboro, Virginia, the South River Complex is home to many artisans, including Min Martin, owner of Romeo Glass.
The company name is Romeo Glass, which is named after a cat that used to prowl the studio in Santa Barbara, where I got my start blowing glass. In my mid-20s, I moved out to Santa Barbara and was building boats at the time, wooden boats, and met an old Italian man. And he apprenticed me for 2 years and kicked me out. But yes, there was this cat, Romeo, that would prowl the studio and disappear at night, and he was a very charming cat. So after Santa Barbara, I moved back east, and we built this studio in 2005. Glass was very, very compelling. It's a very immediate kind of craft. Either you do it right the first time or you throw it away. There's not a lot of going back and trying to fix stuff. A lot of other artistic disciplines, it's a cumulative process where, like in pottery, you make the shape and then you glaze it and then you fire it and then you glaze it again, or painting where there's numerous layers of, and I think the immediacy of glass really appealed to me, where you make something, you put it in a box, and the next day it's done. And in my mid-20s, that was very appealing. And I thought in my mid-20s that this would probably be just a lark, and I would spend a couple years being a glass blower, and then I would get a real job. And that was 20 years ago, so I guess this is my real job. Waynesboro is blessed with a lot of old industrial architecture that has been mostly dormant since the heydays in the 50s. So when we walked into this space, there was plenty of power already wired in, there was good gas supply, the price was very, very reasonable. And yeah, it was kind of plug and play. I mean, we had to build the equipment, but for the most part, the space was, we didn't need to do much to the space. And this complex, the South River complex, is filled with other artisans. Our neighbors are blacksmiths. There's a steeple maker beside us. There's now a solar company here, potters, carpenters, all manner of craftspeople here, and that kind of community is pretty wonderful.
It is thought that glass was invented by the Phoenicians by accident and was later perfected by the Egyptians. The Romans were the first to start blowing glass. In the United States, glassmaking was mostly done in factories until the 1950s when artisans began experimenting, starting the studio glass movement. It was also at the very beginning of the craft culture.
1 or 2 generations ago, glass was largely made in a factory. West Virginia had lots of big factories that cranked out a lot of barware and decorative glass. In the 50s, people began experimenting with these smaller scale studios where the maker was also the designer, was also the seller, was also the bookkeeper, and it shrank the scale of glassmaking down very small because equipment became available and melting glass became available and color became available. So the studio glass movement was born in this country in the 50s. And that allowed an incredible diversity of expressions of glass to happen. Whereas before it was designed in a factory and they would crank out thousands of the same piece.
Romeo Glass focuses on original production glass that is both artistic and functional. Min's many creations are meant to be used and admired on a daily basis.
I make a lot of goblets, stemware, wine glasses, champagne flutes, martini glasses. I make vases, I make lighting, I make various fantastical creations such as swords and genie lamps. The bulk of my products are sold to galleries who then resell them. I've got about 75 galleries across the country that I work with. And I also do 4 or 5 retail shows direct to the public every year. And of course, the online component of business is growing every year as that world expands and my facility and navigating it increases.
First, he picks up clear glass out of the furnace with a rod.
The main piece of equipment is the furnace, which is a piece of equipment that has a crucible in the bottom that has about 200 pounds of glass that must be kept at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit all the time, 24/7. So when we turn on a furnace, it stays on for 4 or 5 years. So the first thing I do is I'm going to go to the furnace here, which again is at 2,000 degrees, and I'm going to take a gather on the end of this blowpipe. And I'm going to walk over to the marver, which is this metal table, and shape it a little bit by rolling on the marver.
Then, at the bench, the first bubble is added by blowing into the end of the rod. Then, back to the furnace to gather more glass. Silver is added to the glass at the marver. More clear glass is added at the bench. Then it is heated at the glory hole. Now it is blocked at the bench with a shaping tool.
I'm going to sit at the bench and I'm going to block the piece. Blocking is using a wooden shaping tool to create the form that you want to start with.
A second bubble is added, and then back to the glory hole for reheating.
The other piece of equipment is called the glory hole. That's basically a barrel on its side, insulated with a burner inside, and that is used to reheat the glass as you're working it. When glass comes out of the furnace, it's cooling at about 50 degrees a second, so your working time is limited. So you must occasionally reheat the piece to make it take the shape you'd like it to.
At this point, the blow hose is hooked up and glass blowing begins. Then back to the bench for jacking a neckline for the vase.
At the bench, I'm using a tool called the jacks, which look like large tweezers but have knife blades on the end. This is the main tool used in glass blowing. So I'm going to cut in a neckline where eventually the piece will be cracked off.
It is then put back in the glory hole for reheating. The next step is swinging out the bottom. Using newspaper, the bottom of the vase is shaped.
The shaping tool I'm using now is the New York Times, which is wet. Newspaper is a very common tool. It's the most tactile part of glass. You clearly can't touch glass, but it's as close to touching glass as you can get. So I'm cooling down the part of the piece that I don't want to expand, while the hotter part up toward the pipe does expand.
Then back to the glory hole.
Going back to the glory hole this time, and now I'm heating the entire piece because now I'm going to flatten it. So once the whole piece is somewhat moving, I'm going to go back to this hanger and hang up the piece, and using cork paddles, I'm flattening the piece. A couple of passes with the cork paddles, and we have a flattened piece now. I'm using this torch to heat just the bottom of the piece. And then I'll take my jacks, the back side of the jacks, and press a flat spot where the piece will eventually sit.
Another rod, known as the punty, is heated in the glory hole and attached to the bottom of the vase.
To the furnace again with another punty, I'm getting a button this time, which is another bit of hot glass, which I pop onto the bottom, flatten the bottom again, and the next part of the process is called the transfer. Using the jacks, I chill the neckline that I made originally, so when I tap the blowpipe, it breaks right at the neckline.
Next in the process is swinging out the neck of the vase.
And now there's the process of stretching out the neck. So like I stretched the bottom, now I just want the top to be hot. So I heat the top side of the piece, come out, swing it, do the same thing again. And this time I'm going to go to the bench, and using the shears, I'm going to create an asymmetrical pull on the neck of the piece, which will eventually give it a little curve on the top.
Then it's to the bench for final shaping. A torch is then used to bring the silver to the surface of the vase.
At the bench, I'm using a propylene torch to reduce the surface. So the silver color that I picked up at the beginning will now start to strike or reduce. And you can begin to see the silver come out, and the spider webbing that I put on initially block that reduction to create a silvered piece that is webbed with these stringers.
Then it goes back into the glory hole with reduction heat. From there, it goes to the fuming chamber and receives a titanium aerosol. This creates a rainbow effect on the final vase.
And once I see that it's uniformly silver, I go to the fuming chamber, where there is a gun with titanium in an alcohol in it. I press this pedal, and an aerosol of titanium is released into the chamber, and the piece strikes. The striking process is a little uncontrollable. I try to stop around blue, but depending on the heat of the surface, it'll strike more quickly or more slowly, and I'll get the other colors in the spectrum.
The punty is knocked off.
So now the piece is done, and I go to this knockoff table, and using a butter knife, I chill the contact point between the punty and the bottom of the piece. And once I feel like that connection is compromised enough, I tap the pipe, and the piece falls off onto the table. And using these tongs, I put it in the annealer.
and the finished vase is put into the annealer box where it cools down overnight.
The annealer is at about 1,000 degrees, and throughout the day, all the pieces I make will go into the annealer. And then overnight, it will cool down, and tomorrow morning, you'll have this lovely bit of art glass that is being shipped to Santa Monica, or Des Moines, or New York.
Min creates many production glass products through Romeo Glass. Everything from stemware and vases to daggers and genie lamps. He continues to invent new products each year and pushes his craft to the limits. His work can be seen on his website and at over 70 galleries across the country. Production funding for Made in Virginia is made possible in part by the Virginia Foundation for Public Media, supporting public media initiatives throughout Virginia, and by at Atlantic Union Bank, we believe that Made in Virginia means something special, something unique. After all, Virginia is where tradition meets technology, where hard work combines with innovation, where artisans, entrepreneurs, small businesses, and corporations take business to the next level. We're there every step of the way as champions of Virginia businesses and as a proud supporter of Made in Virginia and Virginia Public Broadcasting.